It made me cry.
This one's wife, Prince Harry, the palace backlash. Last week, the judgment was handed down from the Court of Appeal, which told Harry, no, we're not going to declare Ravek's decision unlawful. We're not going to say that the judge at first instance was wrong. Your appeal has failed. This naturally did not go down well with the Prince of Pink Pancakes, who immediately had a baby huff and arranged for the release of his interview with the BBC and a statement where he basically talked about how he'd been subjected to an establishment stitch-up, that certain individuals had clearly got it in for him, that he would love reconciliation with his family, despite him repeatedly smearing them, and basically made himself look like, for want of a better description, a weapons-grade helmet and total bell end as a consequence of this rant. It was the response of somebody who doesn't truly understand the legalities of the situation. It was the rant of somebody who has a fixed view, driven by a sense of entitlement, paranoia, and a belief that he is right and that he should get his own way. It was the response of an individual who, for a long time, has always had things go his way by virtue of the privilege that he was born into, and therefore, and somewhat understandably, is unable to cope when it doesn't go his way. It's the behaviour of somebody that has formed an entrenched view as a consequence of the things that have happened in his life, not least the death of his mother and also the malign influence of his wife. The result was the half-hour interview with the BBC, where he said a number of things which, surprisingly, the BBC left unchecked, even though they later offered an apology for not challenging some of his comments. They clearly wanted eyes on the interview, and again, as is typical with the Sussexes, it always has to be a soft soap interview so that they get to say what they want to say and they're not challenged with regard to some of the assertions that they make. Furthermore, his statement continued, and if you haven't watched my video where I have torn that apart, I'd encourage you to do so. It's most informative. However, having conducted this interview and issued this statement, what was the view of the palace? Well, as I've explained to you before, King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince of Wales, the Princess of Wales, and others have been adopting a no-contact policy when it comes to Harry and this one's wife. Part of this is driven by, for instance, King Charles's own need for control over his errant son and his crazy daughter-in-law, and from the point of view of the Waleses, it's to protect themselves. Charles naturally has kept his distance because he, like others, recognises that any conversation that takes place with Harry or this one's wife is likely to end up in the press, likely to be monetised and twisted in a particular way. And therefore, in order to nullify that threat to control, he has to adopt a position of having nothing to do with them. Similarly, the situation exists for the Prince and Princess of Wales. But that hasn't stopped the palace making its thoughts known through informal channels. And, as Janet Eastham has reported for the Daily Telegraph, the Duke of Sussex has simply lost touch with reality by giving a scorched earth interview to the BBC, it has been claimed. A palace insider has alleged that the King's aides view the Duke's interview on Friday as proof that he doesn't get the message. And this is entirely accurate. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand because he's dim. He doesn't understand because he's failed to understand the legalities of what's actually going on. The judges aren't there to stitch him up. They're highly intelligent individuals that are objective and they apply the law. And a reading of the judgment by anybody that's got a working brain can see that's the case. Unfortunately, Harry doesn't, because not only is he dim-witted, but he is biased as a consequence of his clouded judgment occasioned by his paranoia that his mum was offed and that this is likely to happen to his wife, something which has been caused by his own intellectual failings and the manipulative behaviours of his wife, as I've explained elsewhere. In an astonishing interview with the broadcaster after losing his legal challenge to reinstate taxpayer-funded security, the Duke made a series of extraordinary comments about the royal family, all while claiming he would love a reconciliation. Once again, it's Harry the hypocrite, it's Harry the contrarian, and this is because he does genuinely want a reconciliation, but it has to be on terms which he doesn't realise are unacceptable and make him look stupid to keep maintaining them. The interview is understood to have deepened the rift between Buckingham Palace and the Duke and his wife, this one's wife, with a peace between the two sides more distant than ever. Hardly a surprise. They haven't done themselves any favours in the past as a consequence of their behaviour, which is well documented, and once again, they portray themselves as the victims, they make it seem as though the palace is out to get them, and they continue to smear. This is not going to endear anybody to you with regard to seeking reconciliation. It's now claimed that a senior courtier labelled the Duke deluded for thinking that airing the family's private affairs on national television could bring about a reconciliation, and he is. Harry's delusion stems from the fact of two things. One, he's thick, and two, he has this prejudiced and biased approach generated by virtue of a mindset that was occasioned by what had happened in the past. He just cannot escape that. The insider said, Harry has simply lost touch with reality. The man doesn't get the message. His father has avoided all his efforts for the last few years to speak on the phone or try to get messages to him through various circles. This TV moment shows his desperation and refusal to accept any responsibility for attacks on the royals, attempts to undermine the institution, and vicious claims about racism and bullying. One of Charles's team labelled him deluded for thinking a media interview quite clearly poking at his father and brother could force any talks. They added, if Harry reckoned going scorched earth was a clever move, he was foolish. On Sunday, the Duchess posted a black and white photograph on Instagram showing the Duke walking through what appeared to be the couple's California garden with his back to the camera, carrying Princess Lilibet on his shoulder and holding Prince Archie's hand. The image, shared 2 days after his interview, in which he said he can't see a world in which he brings his family back to Britain, was uploaded without a caption. The prolonged estrangement, coupled with last week's Court of Appeal ruling that he doesn't qualify for state-funded security in the UK, well, that's not quite right, is understood to have prompted his decision to speak to the BBC. The insider also said the irony of the Duke using the media to seemingly criticise the royal family was not lost on the palace. The very arena of the media, which he has bemoaned for years, is the same platform he utilises to seemingly hurt his father by saying things like Charles may not belong for this world, as well as other disrespectful accusations. The irony is not wasted on anyone within courtier circles and senior royals, the source added. Accordingly, there is the palace's backlash. Naturally, the king will say nothing. Naturally, the Prince and Princess of Wales will say nothing. But the views are made known, and it's simply to say that Harry's deluded, that he doesn't get the message, and it's quite clear. Other press outlets following his outburst have been of a similar nature, that it's ridiculous what he's come out with, and many have slated him using some unsavoury descriptions. Below-the-line comments and social media has similarly lambasted him for this entitled response. And here you have the palace backlash, which demonstrates that reconciliation is even further away than ever before. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.